A crucible is a defining moment in someone's life. It's usually unplanned, often negative, but not necessarily the case. Where are my students at? Raise your hands. It's going to be interactive, so you're going to have fun, I promise. Okay, get this. You're at a crucible right now. There's 3 outcomes, and this is the same case with every single crucible that you could encounter in your life. First thing, you're going to lose. You're going to win, and you're still going to lose. Okay, so here's the thing. When a crucible happens, people tend to either go in a place that is very dark, and they stay there. We all know the story of somebody where something bad happened and they have that victim mentality and they're never able to pull themselves out of it, right? We all know that person. Second type of person goes down into a little bit of a funk, doesn't necessarily recover. They live a somewhat mediocre life, somewhat average. They do the thing, you know, they stay close to home, they have the family. Maybe in their midlife they have this wake-up call and they always have that emptiness inside them, right? They're never really able to pull themselves out of it. They're not necessarily happy, but they're not necessarily sad. They're just kind of meh. And then we have that third person. That third person is who I want to talk to you about today, because I firmly believe in some of my conversations with all of you, you all have this type of personality. The third person gets shot down. They get rejected. If you're in sales of any kind or you're an entrepreneur, guess what? You're going to be that third person, because rejection's coming, and it is coming fast, and it is coming often. And you have the mindset to say, I'm gonna keep trying this, right? Like salespeople and entrepreneurs, we're the craziest people in the world because we get rejected all the time and we know it. But that third person, when you get rejected, they get down on their lowest of lows. They could have days, they could have weeks, they could have months, they could have years where nobody understands them. They feel alone, they are tortured inside, and then something happens and they push through to a life of unimaginable joy. And everybody who said that they couldn't do it is now asking them how they did it. My goal today is to show you 4 components and 3 principles that will make you that third category of person. You see, I was born with the lung condition called cystic fibrosis. Anybody familiar with that? Wow. I have never had that happen. So for those of you who did not raise your hand, usually one person's like, does that have something to do with arthritis? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that basically destroys your lungs. I have a buildup of thick, sticky mucus that I can't cough out easily. It causes infections anywhere from 2 to 10 times a year. To date, I've spent a third of my life in hospitals. I take on average of 30 pills every single day just to digest food. In 2001, I slipped into a diabetic coma that doctors feared would leave me with permanent brain damage. I woke up, as far as I can tell, my brain's intact, but it did leave me with a form of diabetes, so Travis on the podcast earlier, I made a diabetic joke, I'm allowed to. And that being said, I now give myself up to 5 insulin injections every single day. I was up at 4 a.m. to make sure to do enough airway clearance so that way I would have the lung function to be able to talk with you all. And yes, I have done more drugs than Charlie Sheen, except I've never been high. So that's always entertaining. So here's the deal. Here's how infections with cystic fibrosis can happen. I'm doing fine. You guys would never know I have this condition, right? You're like, wow, that's surprising. But here's the thing. Tomorrow morning I could wake up and I have that slight cough in my lungs. And I can feel that tickle. And what would happen is I can go from hiking 12 miles in Yosemite to being bedridden for weeks, sometimes months at a time. And because of the frequent hospitalizations, my veins have completely collapsed, so I had to get a port installed in my chest for immediate IV access. Now, we all understand something called antibiotic resistance. There are 5 drugs out currently right now that I can get access through my IV, and I'm allergic to 3 out of the 5 because I've developed this resistance. So the entire thing I'm talking to you about today stems from a combination of neurolinguistic programming, selling techniques, and life within a hospital. Did the math a couple years ago, and so if you were born today with cystic fibrosis, you can expect to live about 37 years old. At 31, my life is 83% over. So statistically, I've got about 17% left if I was absolutely born today with this condition. And I remembered thinking, I was 25 at the time, and I was in charge of setting up the West Coast division of a Boston-based biotech pharmaceutical recruitment firm, and I was in charge of all sales, all operations, employee number one on the West Coast. And I bought my first house at 22, making 6 figures, corner office, great cars, everything. And my lungs had gotten so bad that I had this moment where I realized I would not be alive soon. And I checked into the ER with a consultation of a friend, and I learned my lung function's at 37%. And I remember very clearly, the doctor's walking out, the nurse hooking up the nasal cannula, and they send in a social worker. And the social worker said, "Kaylin, I'm so proud of you." And I'm like 25, 26 at the time. And she goes, "I'm so proud of you, but you've had a good run. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to really just resign from your job," and I'd come to terms, that's what I was gonna do anyways. And she hands me a stack of paperwork and says, "This is how you get on Social Security Disability Services. This is your last straw." And I quit everything. Never heard from those CEOs again. They liked one of my YouTube videos, so we're good. But I'd never heard, it's actually true. So I signed the papers. I hired an attorney, the best one in the biz, and we went on Social Security Disability. My income now living in Southern California is $1,300 a month, which then leads to a series of couch surfing off of Craigslist and doing odd jobs to get Amazon gift cards, because you can't legally make money on disability, right? It's this whole crazy thing. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what am I gonna do with the time I have left? I can't do sales, I can't do recruiting, I'm done. So I do the bucket list, I go to Vegas, I dance on tables, I get on a Harley with a guy and I ride around rural Iowa. Crazy, but fun. I wish to do it. And I start really thinking about, where do I want my life to go? What do I want my legacy to be? Is there such a thing as a legacy, or is this just some kind of bullshit term we tell each other to make ourselves feel good, right? And so I remember a time when I was 17. At the time I was hospitalized at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. And it's prom season, so ladies, this is a big deal for us, right? This is like our rite of passage. And I'm in the hospital and I'm getting hooked up to all my meds and my nebs and blah, blah, blah. And MySpace was cool. If you guys don't know what it was like premature Facebook. And all of my girlfriends are showing photos on MySpace of their prom dresses. It hurt really bad, because I knew I'd never get to go to prom. And I remember the nurse walks in and she says something along the lines of, "We've got options for you today, sweetie. Would you like your anti-nausea meds with breakfast or with lunch?" I was like, how is it that there are women out there that get to pick their prom dresses, and my decision is if I want anti-nausea meds with breakfast or with lunch? And I was pissed. I was like 17, rage, right? And I'm crying. I'm a victim mentality at this point. I'm bawling hysterically. It's not fair. Why don't I have the normal life that all these other girls have? And my mom notices my pity party, as any good mother does, and she goes, "Kaylin, you deserve it. You've had every opportunity. You can have as big of a pity party as you want. But you've got half hour." She literally set a timer. And you know what she does 30 minutes later? Guys, this is cruel and unusual punishment. 30 minutes later, she puts me in my wheelchair and she rolls me up to the 7th floor burn unit, where I had to meet other women who lost most of their bodies to fire. I smelled the decaying flesh. I talked to a lady who was tied to her bedpost. The house was set on fire after her boyfriend raped her and left her for dead. And I realized in that burn unit, there were multiple types of personalities happening. There were women who would never, understandably, recover from the trauma they went through. There were women who were like, "All right, I'm just gonna go back to my day job after this." And then there were women who were like, "I'm gonna create something out of this experience and give meaning to my life." And that was where the obsession with crucibles came from. The crucible that you are all in right now. One of the things that absolutely fascinated me, I'll never forget it, the woman who was left for dead, the entire time I'm talking to her about my stupid problems about prom, I couldn't help but notice how happy she was. And I didn't realize what was gonna happen with my life. I had no idea that I was gonna write a book and go on to do any of these things. But I remember being fascinated by happiness and these crucibles, and I'm like, I gotta figure this out. So in the 2 years I had left, from my hospital bed, I wrote that book. Literally, I got on LinkedIn, I'm a LinkedIn maven, you can check it out, and I just started sending messages to all these famous people that one day I dreamed maybe I could be like if there was any hope. What made them happy? How are they successful? How are they fulfilled? And I figured out there's actually a method to this stuff. Like there's systems and processes. Can you tell I'm a ringleader? There's systems and processes that go in to making you happy. And entrepreneurs and salespeople, by the way, are typically the least happy demographic. But that's not the case anymore. Take a guess. In a recent Harris poll, what percentage of Americans consider themselves happy? Throw it out. Come on, interactive. This is a depressed group. I was right. I heard somebody say 1%. I'm like, damn. Okay, no, close. 33% of Americans consider themselves happy. So raise your hand if you're happy. Okay, so everybody, of course, is going to raise because they're like, I don't want these people to know I'm not. But the thing is if you raised your hand, there's a good chance that the person to your left and your right don't consider themselves happy. So what are we to do about it? That becomes the question. You're welcome, I have the answers. Okay, there's 4 principles of happiness, okay? Now, any one of these principles will dramatically transform your life, but here's the deal. If you put focused effort into all 4 of these categories, you will have that life that goes from I wonder if they can do it at all to I wonder how they did it. And that's the life we're all striving for, right? That's why we're entrepreneurs. So the first thing is perceived control. I don't know if you guys can see this, but the point is with your iPhones, you can take a photo. I don't do PowerPoints. If you want any of these, I'll give you a number to text later, and you'll get the infographic. Okay, so perceived control. In 1978, there were a bunch of scientists that got together, and they're like, okay, can we test what happens when a crucible moment happens to determine relative happiness levels? And what they did is they went with 22 lottery group winners, 22 non-lottery group winners, and then 28 paraplegics, quadriplegics who lost their limbs in a sudden, unplanned event. We're going to chart their happiness levels over time. Don't ask how they found these people. I have no idea. Okay, so the first group, they win the lottery. Yay, life is good. Second group, they don't win the lottery. Third group, lose their limbs. Get this, 6 months later, after they charted these crucible moments, their happiness level defaulted to where they currently were at when the study began. Weird. So how does this relate to you? Some of you are going to go home not with the trophy, right? Some of you aren't going on. Most of you aren't going on. If it sucks, that's okay. That's a human condition. It's okay to experience the negative because statistically, 6 months from now, you're going to be fine anyways. It determines what you do with that crucible. Now, if it's amazing, which for some of you, this is going to be like, I've made it, life is opening up, look how bad I am. Get this, 6 months from now, however you're feeling today, not today because today is a high energy day, however you were feeling last week's probably going to be where you're at anyways. So that confidence is going to get shot down. And some of you are thinking like, how is she a motivational speaker? Don't worry, I'll get to that. It's not all negative, okay, I promise you. And then the same thing with the paraquadriplegics. But here's what's interesting. The worst in my world, if I lost my limbs, like I'd be devastated, right? Like, can we agree that that's some pretty horrific stuff? They actually wound up happier than both the control groups 6 months later. They defaulted back, but then they started to push through. So adversity and these losing moments, or these moments when all is on the line and you don't make it, big picture, long term, you'll actually be happier. Fascinating stuff. Perceived control. Next one is perceived progress. This is a fun one. Who plays video games? Yay, we got one person. Okay. What game do you play? I have no idea what that is. Okay, do you have lives in that? Okay, you have to think on if you have lives in that. Okay, well, we'll try it. You know, whatever. Here we are. We can think on our feet. How many lives do you typically have? Like opportunities to win the game? You're done. Okay, give me somebody who has a video game with 3 lives. Mario Kart's, anybody ever played that? Know what it is? Shut up. That kid's like, what's that? Okay. So here's the deal. You can work with this analogy nonetheless. The older people know what I'm talking about. So you're playing a video game, and you've got 3 lives left, right? How are you feeling on that 3rd life? Anybody shout it out? Yeah, you're a little nervous, but you're optimistic. You're like, I can do this. We're going to be fun. This is going to be great. And then what happens? You're playing against a toddler, and the toddler beats you out. Now he agrees. Okay, there's 2 lives left. Now, what's your nervous factor doing? What's your name with the maroon? Yeah, Ray. So what happens when you're at your 2nd live? You're a little nervous, right? Like you went from being like, I can do this to, oh gosh, now it's got another life. Then the toddler kicks your butt again. What are you at now? 1 life? And how are you actually feeling? Anxiety. All right, how many of you know what that one thing that you should be doing in your business right now to grow it is? We all know what that is, but we're not doing it. Why? Because we forget that life is not a video game. We currently, right now, have 1 life. And we have no anxiety. We're just ambling through it, hoping for the best. But if you take that nervous energy that you have, as if you're playing a video game, not his game, because he's got unlimited, so it doesn't count. You're welcome. And you take that nervous energy and you actually fuel it towards something that means something to you, you're going to tap into an unlimited energy source. This is how entrepreneurs can go 24 hours without sleep. They are psycho, I get it. Because they've tapped into their sense of urgency and their sense of time. And it doesn't need to end. So if you know that one thing, if you are lucky enough to know what that one thing is that should change your business, should you actually ever get around to doing it, you need to remember your sense of urgency. New Year's Day, why am I sharing this with you? You're welcome again. New Year's Day, I live in San Diego, we're walking down the harbor, my fiance and I, and he's telling me about all of his resolutions, and he is by far the opposite of ringleader. I'm the idea guy, right? And I'm the ringleader. And we're walking on the harbor, and he's like, I got this idea, this is my resolution. He's like naming like 100 of them. And I'm just like caught up with how silly this sounds. And I go and I say, you know what's funny about resolutions? And I was like, most people who make them, there's a good majority who won't even live through the rest of the year. And he goes, don't put that in your speech. That's a shitty motivational speaker right there. And I go, but it's true. How often are we actually thinking about that? And there's a way to take this as empowering, or there's a way to take it as sadness. There's a way to take what's going to happen to you at GSEA as empowering, and a way to take it as, I wasn't good enough, this wasn't for me, something's happening. But you know what? Everybody thinks you need to be motivated to act. How many times do you hear that, right? Let's get motivated, and then we'll go to the gym. Let's scroll Instagram, right? I get it, I've done it too. But here's the thing, is motivation does not cause action. Action causes motivation. Flip it and watch your life change. 3rd component of happiness is something called connection. This is why I personally love EO, because we understand what it means to connect to another human being. And not in the, I hope you're having a great day kind of way, because that sucks. Okay, so here's the deal with connection. How many of you have your parents that live farther away than you? Wow, quite a bit. Deb, do you mind if I pick on you for a second? Okay. How old are your parents? 70s. Okay. And where do they live? You're welcome. And that being said, anytime you visit, we're going out for martinis. Okay. That being said, how often do you get to see them? Twice a year. That's actually about average. We're going to go into connection. Statistically, the average life expectancy right now is 78. If her parents are 75 and she sees them twice a year, she doesn't get 3 more years with them. She gets 6 more times with her family. You tell me that you go to San Diego again, you're not going to make the most out of those 6 times? Now, what do you do if you take that same energy to the people you see every single day? How many of you are married or in a serious relationship? Raise your hand. Okay. Out of that, how many times a day do you say, I love you? Probably constantly, right? That's what you do. Hey, baby, I love you. Do you realize that over time that loses its effect? But if you say, there's a difference between saying, I love you, and saying, I love the way you tilt your head back when you laugh. That's connection. I remember meeting Jake when I was about 13, and he was 6 or 7. And at the time at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, we would all go downstairs to the basement to work out. And actually, the downstairs area was right next to the morgue, so it had an extra heightened sense of our mortality. And Jake was always, it's true, and Jake was always on the treadmill facing me. So here's the treadmill, and then here's my new friend Jake. And what we would do is, so I have to force myself to cough. So if you guys see me at the gym later and you're like, that's disgusting, I know, I don't like doing it either, but I want to live. So when you have cystic fibrosis, you force yourself to cough to get out that infection, right? So Jake and I would always run on the treadmills next to each other, and we'd compete to see who could cough up the most mucus, because that would mean one of us will live longer. And one day, it's gross, I know. And one day, Jake came in, 6-year-old boy, and he's wearing the nasal cannula, and he's carrying his IV pole. And I was absolutely stunned in that second. How could he need a mask? He's 6. And I'm like, all right, this is what I gotta do. I gotta go a little easy on Jake today, because I can't process watching a 6-year-old die in front of me. And we start running. And I'm slowing my speed because I'm trying to match his tempo, right? Because I don't want him to at all feel insecure. Don't know what it was. And he looks up at me, and you can see his tears welling, and he goes, one day, I'm gonna run like you can. Jake was put on a ventilator that evening and died that weekend. And it makes me wonder, how often are we taking the time to appreciate the people nearest us? You know, and I think that hospital hallways have had more sincere kisses than churches and wedding chapels. And the reason I firmly believe that is because we have this sense of what will happen in our lives. And I also believe that the patients in a hospital are the best example of corporate values you could find. Why? Because we all believe in the same things. Love more than we feel loved. Give unconditional support. Don't be afraid to be authentic and express ourselves. And consistently believe there's always an answer. And you watch hospital patients communicate, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or in their daily interactions, long-term lifers. Those are the people who are in and out of hospitals every year until they die. And all they care about is, are the people going home healthy and happy? Because when chaos happens, or you hear that code blue that says somebody took their last breath, you know for a fact that you did everything you could in the time you had to make their life special. And if you are running a company, if you're fortunate enough to be the CEO, you need to have the same mindset, that the hospital mentality needs to equate to the company. How does every employee go home every day feeling loved, happy, and healthy? Connectedness.